Matt, of course, when we make our videos with Fight Night picks, there's bound to be some late additions. And as always, this week has, of course, delivered. As just today on Monday, as you're watching this video, or possibly watching it later on in the week, we have had a major late addition. At a catchweight of 140 pounds, we have the man, Mr. Highlight, Andre Ewell, now taking on one really tough out, not Boss Rutan, but El Guapo, Chris Gutierrez. And I'm really looking forward to this fight. Stylistically, it has the makings for a great one, but really a little bit of backstory on this one. It was really Chris Gutierrez's team over at Factory X that kind of leaked the news that this fight will be taking place at UFC 258. Of course, Andre Ewell was originally supposed to be taking on Cody Stamann last weekend. It was a positive test, an initial positive COVID test from Ewell, and then 2 quick negative tests, but he still had to go through the 10-day quarantine period. He will be fighting, of course, Chris Gutierrez in this fight. Now, Matt, the one thing that really makes me hesitant, especially from, a gambling perspective, is you got a guy that was supposed to take on such a good primary wrestler in Cody Stamann. Obviously, if you go back to our video there, we leaned heavily into that fact, obviously not taking anything away from Andre Ewell's individual style. But the one thing that really worries me is, okay, you game plan for that opponent. You've been quarantined for 10 days. What the hell does Andre Ewell look like in this fight? It's pretty tough to tell.
Oh, it really is. And it's been kind of weird too. We've seen this at least recently where we'll have a short notice opponent, but at least the short notice opponent, the swap out, they'll have a similar style to the original opponent. So you're not all that worried. You're like, okay, well, at least this guy prepared for a primary striker. Cody Stamann barely throws punches. He barely throws strikes, if we're being completely honest. So the fact that he is getting matched up now with a primary striker, it'll be interesting. And really, it's probably a huge relief for Andre Ewell because we know what Ewell likes to do. He likes to stay at range, uses boxing, likes to dart in and out. Kind of that Michael Venom Page kind of style. Not as kick heavy, but you get the idea. Against Chris Gutierrez, he is going to be able to let his striking flow a little bit more without the threat of the takedown. But the leg kicks from Gutierrez are going to be a big issue in this fight because if Andre Ewell does have any weakness in his striking, it is going to be those kicks because he does have that kind of Conor McGregor style, if you will. So Gutierrez is dedicated to the leg kick, and there's not many things I can guarantee about this card, but Chris Gutierrez will be dedicated to the leg kick. He can start chopping down Andre Ewell really early in this fight. And let's say he does really just stick to that game plan. He's like, okay, I'm going to be really smart defensively. I'm not going to let Ewell really start to let his hands go. Not going to let Ewell go to the body, set up those combinations and whatnot. If he's just dedicated to the leg kick, he's going to take out 90% of the pop on Andre Ewell's shots and really negate all of the power that Ewell has in that, late second, third round.
Which, if you go back to Andre Ewell's last fight, it was against a primary wrestler, I would say, a wrestle boxer in Erwin Rivera. So I went back before this and had a chance to rewatch that fight again. Now, it hasn't been the Luke Thomas 49 times, but I watched it ahead of the Stamann fight that we anticipated. I watched it in front of this fight, too. There are a couple of things that I really took away that I wanted to mention in this because I really have a lot of praise for Andre Ewell. His speed and his movement, some of his best things. You touched on that, especially coming out of that southpaw stance. The one really nice strike that I love is he kind of darts in and he'll throw like a lead uppercut, almost like one of those shovel punches that everybody likes to say, but it doesn't really come from a hook. It comes from an uppercut. I love that because as soon as he throws it, he's right on his toes and he bounces back. Like you said, like an MVP type striker. The one thing that I don't like out of Andre Ewell, and you almost touched on it, was the fact that when he's standing, and I can't use my hands like feet, but when he stands forward with that lead leg, he will kind of rely on his heel a lot. So he'll kind of make a little bit of his movement off his heel where he almost stands flat-footed and he kind of moves around a little bit, but there's points in time where he's heavy on that lead leg and he's flat-footed. You have a guy, and it's really cheap. We have to say that. It's really cheap to boil Chris Gutierrez down into, well, this guy loves the calf kick. Just go back and watch one of his fights. Of course, that was a showcase for that move, and people kind of figured it out. Now, for Chris Gutierrez, well, his last time out was a draw. And was it like that Timur Valiev type where Valiev comes out last weekend and they tell you he's on this big unbeaten streak and he's this uber prospect? And listen, Valiev looked great, but they totally overshadowed the fight that he had where he got finished by Trevin Jones. So if you look at Chris Gutierrez in his last fight, he was originally supposed to take on a guy that I think we talk about way too much on this show, a guy from Nashville, Tennessee in Luke Sanders. Now, that fight fell out. Of course, Sanders out on short notice. In steps wee little Cody Durden. And I say wee little because, yeah, he had fought at bantamweight, but really he's a flyweight. In his last fight against Jimmy Flick, he was a flyweight as well. Durden went in there and wrestled. And if you know anything about Cody Durden going to wrestle, and he did. So Gutierrez struggled with it at the start, which was kind of weird because Gutierrez, the bigger guy, he has a pretty good wrestling base. He has some pretty good jiu-jitsu. He lost that first round handily, but he came back in the second and third rounds. I think a really important thing in this fight, first round, Andre Ewell is a fast starter, and he goes out there and throws a lot of volume. The interesting thing, if you look at Andre Ewell, Matt, I'll throw it back over to you after this. Andre Ewell in his first round against Erwin Rivera, 34-75 total strikes, then 35 out of 97, then 55 out of 129. His average went down and up in terms of significant strike percentage, but he kept going up in terms of total strikes. I was really surprised by that because normally Andre Ewell starts to kind of wane in the second, wane in the third.
Exactly. And for Ewell, it really depends on what pace he's fighting at, because if he is just happy to stand at that sort of mid to long range, he'll be able to go for 15 minutes quite easily and keep a fairly high output too. And that's what makes this interesting too when you talk about the range, because Chris Gutierrez, to land that leg kick, he's going to be at the most dangerous range for himself, because at that sort of mid-range distance, that's where Andre Ewell can set up his jab, straight left, and he's going to crack you with that punch over and over and over again. And once you do let Andre Ewell start setting up his boxing combinations, he's not like Kelvin Kattar. He'll land pot shots like one shot, and then he'll start, he'll gain his confidence and then start landing big long combinations. Ewell's kind of similar to that, where he needs to build his confidence before he really lets his combinations go. So if Gutierrez can stifle that timing early on, I think he'll have great success throughout this fight. But if Andre Ewell is able to just check a couple of those leg kicks, at least land the jab and keep the fight at a comfortable range, he should have success. But that's the big if. It's, can he check the really hard kick to check? And if he doesn't, what will he look like in that third round? Because if Andre Ewell can't resort just back to his good boxing, what is he going to do? Because we're not really going to see him use this really developed kicking game himself.
And we've seen it out of Andre Ewell in the past, and that was really the narrative going into that last fight. The two narratives were the guy has porous takedown defense. I mean, I know if you look in terms of overall stats, I think it's 72%. So not that it's really that bad. It's 73% actually, and he has a 50% takedown accuracy himself. But you look at the fight against Erwin Rivera. Rivera goes for a lot of takedowns in the open space, and Andre Ewell is able to anticipate them coming. He's able to sprawl out, and then out of that, get back up. I know at the end of the first round, he got himself in a somewhat favorable position. The very dying seconds of the third round, Rivera goes for a power double leg, gets on top, and there's about 5 seconds left, and he starts to land elbows. If that fight went on another 15, 20 seconds, who knows how it could have ended? I mean, I'm not just playing it up. Go back and watch the tape. It was pretty surprising. There were also points in that fight where, yes, the output was there for Andre Ewell in his last fight, but in the second and in the third, he started to get a little sloppy with it, and you saw Erwin Rivera start to crack him. And listen, I'm not saying Erwin Rivera is this great fighter, but if a guy like that can do that in a fight, who's to say that a guy like Chris Gutierrez can't? If you want to go back to his last fight for Andre Ewell, very, very controversial split decision win over Jonathan Martinez. Majority of fans, media members, and I guess armchair judges had scored that fight for Martinez. Before that, a finished loss to Marlon Vera. Ahead of that, a decision win over Anderson Dos Santos. And before that, a submission loss to Nathaniel Wood. If we look over at Chris Gutierrez, the reason why I teased that draw that he had against Durden, 3-fight win streak before that, a knockout win or a TKO due to leg kicks against Vince Murdoch, a split decision win over Geraldo de Freitas, a win over Ryan McDonald. McDonald was coming in on short notice in that one. And we've only seen Ryan McDonald twice in the UFC in 2 losses, the loss to Gutierrez, and then just a terrible loss to the last samurai, Louis Smolka. And then in his debut for Chris Gutierrez, he lost to Raoni Barcelos, who some might think is like this dark horse in the division. And listen, maybe I'm one of those guys, but I really like Raoni Barcelos. He just has to fight a lot more. But the point is, with a guy like Gutierrez, he's been fighting a very high-level competition for a long time. You look at the fights outside of the UFC, Ray Rodriguez finishes him. Jimmy Flick finishes him. Those two are in the UFC now. Jared Sanders, he had fought. That's a name that people recognize. Timur Valiev, winning a split decision over him, losing to him, beating Aaron Phillips on the regional scene, who had been in the UFC. I mean, all sorts of big names on that record. And again, overall, you look at Chris Gutierrez, great leg kicks. a lot less volume than we're going to see out of a guy like Andre Ewell. That's kind of the calling card. In terms of significant strikes landed per minute, you look at Andre Ewell, 4.5 given to 4.2 taken. You look at Gutierrez, 4.2 given to 2.11 taken. So you definitely like the striking defense and that metric in the court of Chris Gutierrez, who's coming in on short notice on this or in this fight. It's a weird one. Stylistically, it's a great one, but it seems like it's going to be either one or the other. Gutierrez is able to kind of withstand the early barrage, start setting things up with leg kicks and earning a takedown, or you just have the steady output of Andre Ewell where he doesn't let Chris Gutierrez get inside. It's a tough one to try and predict. Again, I'm not throwing any money on this fight whatsoever. It's not due to the short notice nature, but what's your overall takeaway here and really the final pick, if you will?
So I think we can label this one of those pop and popcorn picks because this will be a very fun fight. I'm much more excited for this fight than I would have been for that Cody Stamann Andre Ewell fight because I love a nice Andre Ewell fight. He's out there for a good one. Here's the thing. For Chris Gutierrez, he could beat Andre Ewell with a full training camp. The fact that it is only on 1 week notice, listen, he does have the nice leg kick, and he will be able to land that throughout the fight. But it's really hard for me to say on 1 week notice that he's going to be able to go in there and beat a guy like Andre Ewell. So my last pick is going to be Andre Ewell. I think he'll be able to win a decision. I do like his overall output throughout the fight. And you spoke a little bit about the strength of schedule of Chris Gutierrez. Andre Ewell's been in there with some great fighters himself, too.
That's it, too.
He hasn't always beat them all. Like, he didn't beat Nathaniel Wood. He didn't beat Marlon Vera. But just being in there with those guys, you're going to get better from there. And I know he fought your boy, Renan Barão, one of the greatest fighters of all time. So Andre Ewell's been in there with some of the better fighters in his weight class. I like the overall output. I like the boxing. I think Ewell will be able to get it done.
I was surprised, and again, incredibly limited sample size over in Tapology. 100 votes, 67 of them for Chris Gutierrez coming in here on short notice, and I'll be eager to see where the line drops on this one. But it is a tricky one. Again, you can go back and boil it down to, well, Chris Gutierrez, there's a blueprint for him for sure. I like his ground game. I really do like those leg kicks. Again, the single power shots, are they going to work against a guy like Andre Ewell that throws steady volume and cuts a lot of different angles? And the other thing about Andre Ewell too, while he might not be the greatest off his back, he's really creative when he gets to the mat. And it's not in like a, old-timey Corey Sandhagen where he got a little cute with things. It's like, hey, I got to do something. I've got these long gangly arms. Let's see what I can do with it. So I'm really looking forward to this fight. The scrambles, just everything about it. The striking should be insane. It's a pop and popcorn fight for me. I will slightly edge Andre Ewell in this one as well. But again, it's not with the most confidence in the entire world. You go back and you look at these two guys, they match up incredibly well. It should produce a great fight. So what I want people to do that are viewing this out there, you let us know down in the comments below. Maybe you've never commented before. You've been on this train for a while. You got to comment below. Let us know who you're picking. And when we get to question mark kicks on Saturday, it's 2 hours before the prelims, I'm going to go through some of these comments. We're going to pick and choose some of the best armchair analysts out there, and we'll be sure to shout you out on the show. So make sure you let us know in the comments who's getting the win. Andre Ewell? Is it Chris Gutierrez? Are we donkeys? Are we savants? I don't know. Let us know. So hit us up in the comments. I'm really looking forward to this fight. It should be a great one, Matt. So keep it locked in with Fight Night Picks. And as we always say, let's get into it.